Hello and welcome to yet another interesting and engaging session of The Analyst, brought to you by Vachiram and Ravi, dated 15 September 2024, wherein we'll be covering the important current affairs article from both The Hindu as well as Indian Express. Today we have made certain changes when it comes to the format of The Analyst to further enhance your understanding of the newspapers. So what is going to be the format? So the first two articles, we'll try to understand them in the most comprehensive way possible, and when it comes to the next 7 set of topics, we'll try to understand them in the most simplest way possible. So when it comes to the first topic, that is the digital banking, herein we'll try to understand that how digital banking is transforming the way we interact with the financial institutions and how it is transforming the way we manage our finances. Then in the second topic, that is the glacial retreat, we'll try to understand that what is glacial retreat, what are the causes for it, what are its impact at the global level, and how we can address it. These are the last 7 set of topics that we'll be covering in the most simplest way possible. So stay tuned. Beginning with the first topic, that is digital banking. This topic is related to this aspect of our GS paper 3 syllabus. What is the context? So the article which appeared in Indian Express has highlighted that in the digitalization era, digital banking is redefining the way we interact with the financial institution and the way we manage our finances. The first thing that we need to understand with regard to this topic is, what is digital banking first of all? It basically refers to automation of the repetitive tasks, which would be reducing the pressure when it comes to the banking employees, and they'll be able to focus on more productive tasks. That is, they'll be able to collect the data and they'll be able to come up with personalized banking products. Now, the first thing that we need to understand is, what are the reasons why digital banking is on a rise when it comes to the Indian society? The first thing is the different advancement in technology that the Indian society is witnessing today. We have 5G, we have Internet of Things, we have the artificial intelligence, which is promoting the adoption of digital banking when it comes to the Indian society. Then the internet penetration has also increased when it comes to the Indian society on account of low data rates. Then the customer's expectation is changing nowadays. The generation today believes in on-demand gratification, and to meet the expectation of the customers, the banks are also moving in the direction of digital banking. Then the digital infrastructure which is available is enabling the banks to come up with various innovation and come up with various specialized products. Now, you need to understand the examples of digital banking when it comes to the Indian society. The first is real-time gross settlement. It enables you to transfer the money from one bank to another bank in the real-time basis. This is the fastest way to transfer the money from one bank to another bank. Then we have AI chatbots, which are there to assist the customers when it comes to doing the basic or normal banking transaction. So example is the SBI SIA, SBI Intelligent Assistant, which would be helping or assisting the customers of SBI the same way a banking employee does, okay, so that they can carry out the normal banking service or banking transactions. Then we have internet banking also. So you can go to the website of your bank and you can do the transaction and you can do different things when it comes to the internet banking. Then we have digital wallets. I know majority of you would be aware with Google Pay, GPay, then we have Paytm also. So this basically is an example of digital banking when it comes to the Indian society. Then we are providing instant loans with the help of PSB loans in 59minutes.com, which basically enables us to provide instant loans to the MSMEs within 59 minutes. This enables us to enhance the credit access when it comes to the MSME sector in the Indian society. Then we have neobanks. What is the concept of neobanks? These banks do not have any physical branches. They are only available digitally. And they do not have any associations with the traditional banks also. What are the examples of neobanks? So you have Razorpay X, we have Jupiter, we have Nayo, etc. So when these banks are available only digitally, their presence is only digitally, they do not have any physical branches, those banks are referred to be as the neobanks. And they are contributing effectively when it comes to promoting innovation when it comes to the banking sector. The next thing that we need to understand is what all benefits do we get on account of moving in the direction of digital banking. The first is it is making the banking services more accessible. On account of internet banking, on account of the digital wallets, we are able to access the banking services anytime, anywhere. Okay? So that is basically making the banking services more accessible. Then it is simplifying our financial transactions also. According to a study which was carried out by Deloitte, it found it out that 80% of the bank customers are making use of the digital platform to access the banking services. Then it enables you to do effective management of the finances. We have spending trackers, we have financial analytics, which basically helps you understand that where your finances are going, where are the areas wherein you are spending the money. So it enables us to do effective management of our finances also. Then it enables the bank to come up with personalized products for its customers. By using the AI technology, the banks could collect the data, they can process the data, they can make use of big data analytics to come up with the personalized products for its customers. Then it also enables us to save the cost. Remember, I discussed the example of neo banks, which have presence only digitally. They do not have any physical branches. So these banks are able to save that money because they do not have to open any physical branches, and they use that money to promote innovation, R&D, when it comes to the banking sector, which is enabling us to move further in the direction of digital banking. Then next aspect that we need to understand is what are the challenges. Although digital banking has a lot of benefits, but there are certain impediments when it comes to its effective adoption when it comes to Indian society. The first is digital literacy. When it comes to the rural areas, we have digital illiteracy, and the problem is also when it comes to the women. Women are more digitally illiterate as compared to men. And there is also the issue when it comes to the accessibility. There is also digital divide when it comes to the Indian society. According to the Oxfam Inequality Report of 2022, what it found out that when it comes to the rural areas, approximately 30% of the people only have access to internet, whereas the figure is around 60% when it comes to the urban areas. Then we also have lack of digital skills when it comes to the banking employees. Another issue is unemployment. There is apprehension that if we move further in the direction of digital banking, it would raise the unemployment levels. On what basis we are saying this? Recently, if you would have been following the newspaper, ILO came up with its report, that is World Employment and Social Outlook Report of 2024, wherein it pointed out that the decline in the global income is basically the cause of, or the basic reason is the artificial intelligence. So there are apprehensions that if we move further in the direction of artificial intelligence, if we further adopt the artificial intelligence and advanced technology when it comes to the banking sector, this would increase the unemployment levels in India. Then there are cyber security issues as well. According to a US firm, Resecurity, more than 81 crore individuals' Aadhaar data, Indians' Aadhaar data is available on the darknet. So on account of privacy concerns also, people are reluctant to use the digital banking services. Then there is issue with the usability also. According to various studies, it was found out that during the COVID-19 pandemic, 56% of the Divyang students face a lot of difficulties when it comes to getting access to education at that time. Because during the COVID-19 pandemic, we basically made use of technology to provide education to the students. So when it comes to the Divyang sections, they face issue when it comes to accessing the digital banking services. Another issue is user friendliness of a particular app. Various people are not able to access the banking services because the apps are not very user friendly. There is also linguistic barriers. because more than 80% of the content which is available online is in the English language only. So the people who do not understand the English language, they are unable to access the digital banking services because the content is not available in their regional languages, and the problem is more prominent when it comes to the rural societies. Then there is interoperability issues as well. The digital e-wallets which we have in India, they face interoperability issues, which means that you have to feed in the same data every time when you are using different e-wallet apps. So this further hinders the adoption of digital banking services. Now the last thing that we need to understand with regard to this topic is what needs to be done to enhance the adoption of digital banking in Indian society. The first is we need to make sure that our cyber security is quite robust. And how we can do that? By strengthening the data protection law and by making use of the advanced technology, that is quantum key distribution, which allows end-to-end encryption, secure transmission of the messages. Then we need to enhance the interoperability also, so that the customers do not have to feed in the same data whenever they are going to different e-wallet apps. Then we have to enhance the user friendliness of the apps. How we can do that? By allowing the app to translate the content into different regional languages. Okay. Then we need to further enhance the digital infrastructure also, so that we can enhance the adoption of digital banking services when it comes to the rural areas. And for this, we need to ensure effective implementation of BharatNet program, which basically intend to enhance the digital infrastructure in the rural areas. And in this regard, we should also make use of the common service centers also. Then we need to enhance the digital literacy and the digital skill set when it comes to the banking employees. And when it comes to enhancing the digital literacy, we have PM Disha scheme, and to further enhance digital literacy, we can also make use of the common service centers. That's all with regard to this topic. Kindly attend this particular means practice question. Let's move to the next topic. Now the second topic is related to glacial retreat, and this topic pertains to this aspect of our GS paper 1 syllabus and this aspect of our GS paper 3 syllabus as well. Now the context is, a study was published in the General Nature which highlighted that melting of glacier could help us in mitigating the climate change. The question arises, how? Now, on account of glacial retreat, let's suppose this particular barren land would become barren. Okay. Now, it would be first colonized by the primary microorganisms like the algae, which would basically create the minerals available for the further species like your lichens, like your mosses. Okay. This would ultimately lead us to climax species also. Remember the concept which we studied in the environment, that is ecological succession. So ultimately what would happen? So on account of glacial retreat, this area A has become barren. It would be colonized by the primary species, ultimately leading the way for the climax species. So when this area would be covered by tall trees, etc., they will help in reducing the carbon content from the atmosphere. That's how we'll be able to mitigate the climate change. So this is the context of the article. Let's understand this topic in much greater detail. The first thing that we need to understand is, what is this glacial retreat all about? So it basically refers to melting of the glacier. Why the glacier are melting? So there could be two causes. One is reduction in the precipitation, precipitation, which is basically reducing the ice accumulation, and another reason is on account of climate change, the ice is getting melted. Okay, the glaciers are getting melted, which ultimately leads to glacial retreat. Now, let's look into certain examples with regard to glacial retreat, which have been highlighted by the World Meteorological Organization in its report, The Global Climate 2011-20, a decade of accelerating climate change. So these are the examples which were mentioned in this very report only, which was published by World Meteorological Organization. So it has pointed out that from 2011 to 2020, the world's glacier have melted 1 meter per year on an average. When you look at the volume, it has been forecasted by this very study only that by 2030, the volume of the glacier is forecasted to reduce from 55% to 75%. Then when you look at the glacial retreat when it comes to areas like Greenland and Antarctica, compared to 2001 and 2010 level, we have already lost 38% more ice, okay, when it comes to these regions. Then when it comes to the Arctic Sea, it has reached its mean extent, okay, which is 30% lower when it comes to the figure which was there in 1981-2010. Then it is forecasted that the glacier which is there in the Rwenzori mountains and the mountain Kenya in Africa, they are going to disappear by 2030. And when it comes to Kilimanjaro, the glacier would be disappearing by 2040. Now, what are the prominent causes of glacial retreat? First is the rising temperature. So, the carbon dioxide has reached around 430 parts per million in 2030. This was highlighted by this WMA report only. Then on account of ocean acidification, what is happening? The ocean water is holding a lot of carbon dioxide, which is basically raising the temperature of the oceans, which is ultimately leading to melting of the glacier, because the warm water would be easily now reaching to the polar regions, because it would be having the impact on the ocean currents as well. Then on account of climate change, there is change in the precipitation also. So this is on account of climate change, what is happening is the snow precipitation is going down, which basically have an impact on the accumulation of glaciers. Okay, so these are the primary causes when it comes to the glacial retreat or glacier melting. What are going to be its impact when it comes to the global level? It is going to raise the sea levels. So according to IPCC, Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, between 2000 and 2019 itself, on account of glacial retreat, it has raised the sea levels by 21%, okay, in the past 2 decades. Then it is going to disrupt the ocean currents also. Then we are going to witness a positive feedback loop also. What do we mean by positive feedback loop? Now, on account of climate change, what is happening? Glaciers are getting melted. Now, you must have read in your basic NCERT geography books that glaciers basically contribute in albedo effect. So, they basically reflect back the sun rays to the space. But now, since the amount of glaciers are getting reduced, so it would be reducing the albedo effect when it comes to the glaciers, okay, when it comes to the earth overall. This would further increase the climate change. Then, on account of melting of glacier, the glaciers also have a lot of greenhouse gases like methane, and when the glaciers would be melted, so it would basically be releasing these greenhouse gases, which it has been storing for long period. Okay, so this is going to further reinforce the climate change. So this is what is referred to be as the positive feedback loop, because the melting of glacier is going to further reinforce the climate change. Then on account of melting of glacier, we are going to witness the extreme weather events. For example, the floods that we witnessed in Uttarakhand in 2013 were basically a result of glacial lake outburst. Then it is going to impact the marine life also. Remember, in the example section, we discussed that Arctic Sea is also getting reduced, and the same is the situation with Antarctica Sea also. We have a doomsday glacier there that is getting melted over a period of time. So this would be impacting the marine life, especially the polar bears, the penguins, etc. Then it is also going to have an impact on the global economy, because this would be impacting the fishery sector. Then it would be impacting the coastal regions also. Then on account of glacial retreat, what is happening? New trade routes are getting open, okay, from the via Arctic Sea. So this is going to have an impact on the global economy. So these are the probable impacts when it comes to the global economy. Now, the last thing that we need to understand is what needs to be done to mitigate this situation. So first of all, we need to mitigate the climate change because that is the root cause. And how do we mitigate the climate change? So different countries need to increase their national determined contributions. And they need to take the requisite steps so that we meet the target that we have set for ourselves under the Paris Agreement. Then we can create protected areas like we have done in the Australia when it comes to the Great Barrier Reef. Okay, we have a marine park there. And we can also adopt sustainable fishing practices, as can be witnessed in the Norway, where the Norway is implementing sustainable fishing quotas to protect the fisheries. Then we need to make our coastal infrastructure disaster resilient. And we need to also put in place the flood defense system as has been put in place in the Netherlands. Then we need to adopt sustainable economic practices. We need to move away from take, make and throw model, which is a linear economy model. So from this you have to move towards the circular economy model. What is circular economy model? Wherein you try to reuse, you try to reduce the waste, okay, you try to recycle, etc. Example being, if let's say your cloth has gone torn out, okay, it is no more of use when it comes to you as an individual. So you can donate that particular cloth to a fashion industry which can make another cloth from that same material, okay. So this is how we recycle the content. Similarly, when it comes to your phones also, so different materials could be taken out from them, from your used phone, and it could be used to make a new phone also. So this is how we can recycle the waste materials. And in this regard, we should learn from the Japan, where it is implementing the circular economy models. And lastly, we need to enhance the monitoring of the glacier health, so that we could understand that what all effective steps we need to take. So we need to learn from the European Space Agency, its mission Cryosat, and we should also learn from NASA ICESat-2, which is basically monitoring the glacier health in the Greenland's ice region. Okay, that's all with regard to this topic. We have a practice question for you. Try to attempt this particular question. Let's move to the next topic. Now, this article appeared in The Hindu on page 14. This article is basically talking about the rights which the queer couple are demanding for. So what's the context? So recently, the Ministry of Finance as well as RBI has made it clear to all the commercial banks that from now onwards, the LGBTQ plus community as well as the queer couples would be allowed to open a joint bank account, and they can also nominate their partners as the intended beneficiary. Okay. Now, the article has pointed out the problems which is faced by this particular community. Now, when it comes to the medical emergencies, their queer couples, the partner in that couple cannot take the medical decisions, which is allowed when it comes to the marriage. Because when it comes to the hospitals, when it comes to taking the medical decisions, it is allowed to be taken only by your blood relative or your legal spouse. But when it comes to the LGBTQ plus community, they are not allowed to marry legally. They are also not allowed to carry out the last funeral rites of their partners. They cannot obtain a ration card, okay, as a family. They cannot nominate their partner for payment of gratuity, provident fund, insurance benefits, okay, or they cannot receive the tax benefits also. And when it comes to the laws of succession, inheritance, alimony, maintenance, they do not take into account the LGBTQ plus community. And when it comes to the communication between the queer couples, they are not protected. When it comes to the court, they could be compelled to give the evidence against each other. That is not the case when it comes to the marriages, okay, which is between men and women. And they cannot donate the organs when it comes to their partners. And they are also not allowed to adopt a child, because in this regard, CARA provisions do not allow adoption by this particular community, keeping in mind the child's interest. In our country, marriage is allowed only between heterosexual couples, that is between men and women. Our society is guided by heteronormativity and not by homonormativity. Okay, so the queer couples are not allowed to marry. Now, in Supriya Chakravarti and others versus Union of India case 2023, Supreme Court has basically refused to recognize same-sex marriages. And it also pointed out in this particular judgment that when it comes to the Special Marriage Act of 1954, it basically rejected the demand of the petitioner to reinterpret this particular act. The petitioner was arguing that the term spouses should be inserted at the place wherever we are using men and women. Further, in this particular judgment, Supreme Court although accepted that when it comes to the adoption of children, the law is discriminatory when it comes to the LGBTQ plus community, but the Supreme Court refused to intervene in this regard. It stated that it is the domain of the legislature. The legislature should bring out the requisite amendments when it comes to the child adoption rights in India. Then it also stated that a committee should be created which should be headed by a cabinet secretary to outline what set of rights and entitlements should be available to this particular community. And in this regard, the government has set up a committee which is headed by cabinet secretary, and it is having a 6-member panel. So it would be including the secretaries from following ministries. And it has started taking the feedbacks when it comes to the LGBTQ community. The court has further argued that apart from allowing these couples to open a joint bank account, it has made a request to the center that it should also consider these queer couples to be considered as a family when it comes to the ration cards, and when it comes to the medical emergencies also, they should be considered as a family. That means that when it comes to medical emergencies, the partner in the queer couple should be allowed to take the medical decisions. And it has also made a request to the center that you consider the jail visitation rights, the right to access the body of the deceased partner, basically the funeral rights, succession rights, financial and material benefits, which basically flow from the employment and gratuity, which are basically available to legally married couples. Now, apart from these changes, the LGBT community is demanding that such changes should also be brought in the insurance sector, when it comes to PDS also, and when it comes to income tax departments also. The article is pointing out that the center government should make the requisite changes when it comes to the Inheritance Law, Juvenile Justice Act, Income Tax Act, for basically providing different rights and entitlement to the queer couple, which is basically available to the legally married couples in India. Let's move to the next topic. Now, this next article is related to caste census. This article appeared in page 17 of Indian Express, and this topic is related to this aspect of our GS paper 1 syllabus. Now, before we look into this particular article, first thing that we need to understand is what is caste after all. So, it is a social hierarchy which is based on either occupation or it is based on the basis of birth. It is created on the basis of birth. Now, recently, if you have been following the newspaper, Bihar has come up with its caste survey. And on the basis of this, different opposition political parties are also demanding that we should carry out a national level caste census as well. In this backdrop, this article has pointed out what were the challenges that we witnessed when the caste census was carried out during the colonial era. Now, in 1931, the census was conducted by the British government. It was the first such exercise after 1901 census wherein the caste was taken into account. And this was the census which pointed out that when it comes to OBCs, they comprise 52% of the total population. And it was on the basis of this data only that in 1990s, Mandal Commission recommended to provide 27% reservation to the OBCs when it comes to education and when it comes to the government jobs also. Now, when this caste census was carried out in 1931 by the then Census Commissioner, that is J.H. Hutton. Various sections of the Indian society were pointing out that we should not carry out the caste census. Why? Because they were fearful that if we carry out the caste census, it would reinforce the caste identity further when it comes to Indian society. But Mr. Hutton stated that you cannot get rid of an institution if you fail to accept its existence. So Hutton and its team began the caste census exercise, but they witnessed a lot of challenges. Challenges because non-cooperation movement was being carried out. Congress was also observing census boycott Sundays, and there were a lot of movements at the local level also. Now, the methodology to carry out the caste census undergone a lot of changes over a period of time. In 1881, when the census was carried out, they used to basically count those castes which were having a population of more than 1 lakh. But in 1901, when the census commissioner was basically Risley, he decided to use the Varna system or Varna hierarchy to carry out the caste census. But when it comes to Hutton, he refused to go with this methodology. So what methodology Hutton uses? He used the methodology of occupation. He basically used occupation as a basis to carry out the caste census. But this methodology also have its shortcomings. We were unable to reconcile the variation in the occupation across the regions. What is the issue? When it comes to certain occupations, for example, carrying out agriculture, this was seen to be a good occupation when it comes to the northern regions of India. But when you come to the southern regions, this occupation was basically associated with exterior caste. And when it comes to the 1931 census, which was basically done by Mr. Hutton, it was unable to fully account the fluidity when it comes to the caste identity. What do I mean by this? Currently, you must have witnessed that the herders community has come together and they are claiming them to be Yadavs. So this is what we term it as caste fluidity. And there's a lot of variation when it comes to the caste name. So the article has basically summarized the issues when it comes to the caste census which were witnessed when the caste census was carried out way back in 1931. What was the major issues? First is, how do you define the caste? Because there are a lot of subcastes when it comes to a particular caste. Then another associated problem is the names of the caste differ from region to region. That is another challenge when it comes to carrying out the caste census. And one problem which we have also already discussed, that there is the issue of caste fluidity. And there was no uniform methodology also to carry out the caste census. So the article has basically summed up saying this, that if we are moving in the direction of carrying out the caste census, the government need to come up with a uniform methodology and it need to basically come up with a solution to these problems. That's all with regard to this topic. Let's move to the next one. Now, this article appeared on The Hindu, page 8. And this article pertains to this topic of our GS paper 3 syllabus. What's the context? So recently, at a Ramsar wetland site, that is the Ashtamudi lake, what the Central Pollution Control Board has found out at 4 locations wherein it has placed its monitoring systems, that the water quality is not in adherence with the norms which have been prescribed under the primary water quality criteria for bathing purposes under the Environment Protection Rules 1986. And what are the criteria? So according to this primary water criteria, these are the things which needs to be met. One concept that we need to understand with regard to this is, what is biological oxygen demand? So this is the amount of oxygen which the bacteria require to decompose the organic waste when it comes to that particular water body. If your BOD is higher as compared to this level, that is 3 microgram per liter, what it implies? That the water is highly polluted. Why? Because it implies that there is more organic waste and the bacteria needs more dissolved oxygen to basically decompose the organic waste. And this basically reduces the amount of dissolved oxygen which would be available to other marine animals. Okay. Now, with regard to this article, we need to understand what is this Ramsar Convention. So it basically promotes the sustainable use of wetlands and it basically ensures conservation of the wetlands. Why the name Ramsar? Because this convention was signed way back in 1971 in the Iran city that is named as Ramsar. We also need to know certain prelim pointers with regard to Ashtamudi Lake. So it is a Ramsar wetland which is located in Kollam district of Kerala. Why the name Ashtamudi? Because it has 8 channels and all this water, 8 channels basically meet into one lake. That is why the name Ashtamudi. It is the second largest lake when it comes to Kerala, and the water found its way into the sea through Neend Takara estuary. The Kalada river is the major river which provides water to this particular area. This lake also have historical significance. Way back in 14th century, the port which was situated near the city of Quilon, which is basically situated near the Ashtamudi lake, it enabled this city to carry out trade with the rest of the world. And this city is also mentioned in the sources of Ibn Battuta. Let me know in the comment section that Ibn Battuta basically belonged to which country. This lake also encompasses some endangered species like the Cesium travancoricum and Calamus rota. Then the report has also pointed out that we have found microplastics, especially when it comes to the fish, when it comes to Ashtamudi lake. What are microplastics? It is the plastic which is having a diameter less than 5 millimeters. The major source is the microbeads which are there in the skincare products. And the study was basically carried out by these agencies. Some aspects you also need to know with regard to Central Pollution Control Board. So this was basically given a statutory status under the Water Prevention Control of Pollution Act 1974. And it has also been given the powers and the function under the Air Prevention and Control of Pollution Act of 1981 as well. It provides the technical services to Ministry of Environment with regard to the Environment Protection Act, and it also recommends to the central government and the respective state governments that how we can ensure effective air quality as well as effective water quality. It basically puts into place the standards with regard to the water quality, air quality, how we should ensure scientific disposal of the biomedical waste, etc. That's all that you need to know with regard to this topic. Let's move to the next one. Now, this article appeared on page 11 of The Hindu, and it is related to this topic of our GS paper 1 syllabus, that is architecture. Now, what is the context? Since in Agra for the past 3 days it was raining, so water has started to leak when it comes to the Taj Mahal. But according to Archaeological Survey of India, they have carried out survey with the help of drones. They have pointed out that no damage has been done to this historical architecture that is there, which is of great significance. Although on social media you must be witnessing a lot of photos wherein the garden which is adjacent to the 17th century marvel is submerged in water. These are the different architectural facts with regard to Taj Mahal. Make note of this from this following picture. Now, we need to know certain prelim pointers with regard to Taj Mahal as well. So, it is basically created with the white marble and it was built by the Mughal Emperor Shah Jahan in the memory of his wife Mumtaz Mahal. It took 17 years to construct this marvel. It started in 1631 and the construction basically got completed in 1648 AD. It was declared to be as a centrally protected monument of national importance in December 1920. And it is one of the 7 wonders of the world as well. This fact I think everybody, one of us should know. It was included in the UNESCO World Heritage Site list in 1983. Let's understand certain aspects with regard to Archaeological Survey of India as well. So this institution was created way back in 1861 by Alexander Cunningham. It is a statutory body. It has been created under the Asian Monuments and Archaeological Sites and Remains Act of 1958. So what is its major function? So it carries out archaeological research, it carries out excavation at the historical sites. It plays a prominent role when it comes to conservation of the cultural monuments, and the ministry under which it works is the Ministry of Culture. This article has also pointed out that given the fact that it was raining for just 3 days and we are witnessing leakage at such an important historical monument, we need to effectively plan our cities, okay? So we need to move in the direction of better city planning. That's all that we need to know with regard to this article. Let's move to the next one. Now, this article appeared on page 3 of The Hindu, and this topic is related to this aspect of a GS paper 2 syllabus. What is the context? So currently there is a movement that we need to make justice more accessible. How do you do that? By allowing the use of regional languages when it comes to the proceedings of high courts. The article is pointing out that even though the constitution allows the use of regional languages when it comes to the respective high courts, but currently out of the 25 high courts, only 4 high courts, that is of Rajasthan, Madhya Pradesh, Uttar Pradesh and Bihar, they are allowed to use Hindi when it comes to their proceedings and the legal documents. What are the constitutional articles? So first is Article 348 Clause 1, which basically states that when it comes to the proceedings of Supreme Court and High Court, they shall be carried out in the English language only, until and unless Parliament otherwise decides. When it comes to Article 348 Clause 2, under this, the governor is having the power that it can allow the use of regional languages when it comes to the respective high courts, but in this regard, it needs to get the consent from the president. Now, there have been demands from different states to allow the use of regional languages when it comes to their respective high courts. The center has received the request from states like Tamil Nadu, Gujarat, Chhattisgarh, West Bengal, Karnataka to enable them to use their regional languages, that is Tamil, Gujarati, Hindi, Bengali, etc. But the Chief Justice of India, after thorough deliberation in 2012, has rejected this particular idea. However, various steps are being taken to translate the legal documents, to translate the Supreme Court and High Court judgments in different regional languages. What are the steps? We have a AI-assisted legal translation advisory committee. Then we have this AI-powered SUAS application, which is enabling us to transfer the Supreme Court judgment, to translate the Supreme Court judgments in different regional languages. Then we have Bharatiya Bhasha Samiti, which is basically working under the Ministry of Law and Justice and under the Bar Council of India. It is developing a common core vocabulary which is basically associated with all the regional languages so that we can translate the judgments and legal documents in different regional languages. That's all that we need to know with regard to this topic. Let's move to the next one. Now, this article appeared on page 5 of Indian Express, and this article pertains to this aspect of our GS paper 3 syllabus, that is Achievements of Indians in Science and Technology. So what is the context? So today on 15th September, every year we celebrate National Engineers Day. Why? To basically recognize the role which the engineers play when it comes to the nation's infrastructure and when it comes to the India's economy. And it is also celebrated to commemorate the birth anniversary of M. Visvesvaraya. Who was M. Visvesvaraya? So he was an Indian civil engineer and he was a statesman as well as the Diwan of the Mysore kingdom in 19th century. He was born on 15 September 1861. He has been awarded with highest civilian award, that is the Bharat Ratna Award. He is also renowned as the father of engineering in India. He has made a lot of contribution during the 19th and the 20th century. What are his remarkable contributions? So he has designed and patented the automatic weir water floodgates which are installed at Khadak Vasla Dam in 1903. He made significant contribution when it comes to irrigation systems, and his innovative designs are also employed at Tigra, KRS Dam in Gwalior and Mysore respectively. And his innovations are also being implemented in Yemen, Aden region in early 90s, okay, which are related to water supply and drainage system. He also designed the flood protection system for the Hyderabad, and he also developed the safeguard, the system to safeguard the Visakhapatnam port basically from sea erosion. He served as the chief engineer of KRS Dam in Mysore, and later on he chaired the board of engineers for the Tungabhadra Dam in Karnataka. As the Diwan of Mysore, he spearheaded the establishment of various factories and institutions. Ultimately, they were funded by the Maharaja of the Mysore kingdom. He also played a key role when it comes to establishing the Government Engineering College, which is popularly known as University of Visvesvaraya College of Engineering, which is in Bangalore, and it was created in 1917. It is one of the India's earliest engineering institutes. He also oversaw the commissioning of new railway lines in Mysore, and he also provided the technical advice for the Mokama Bridge over the Ganges. So these were the remarkable contribution of Sir M. Visvesvaraya, which you need to know. How do you celebrate the National Engineers Day? So we organize seminars, workshops, lectures, and these are organized by the government, educational institution as well as professional bodies. One reason is to commemorate the birth anniversary of M. Visvesvaraya, and this is also celebrated so that it could provide a platform to our engineers wherein they can deliberate upon the contemporary issues which our Indian society, Indian economy is currently witnessing, and they can come up with viable solutions in that regard. That's all that we need to know with regard to this topic. Let's move to the next one. Now, the last topic is related to GST. Now, this article appeared on page 12 of The Hindu, and this topic is related to this aspect of our GS paper 3 syllabus. What is the context? So recently, according to the data which has been released by Directorate General of GST Intelligence, the tax evasion when it comes to GST has doubled as compared to what we used to witness in the financial year of 2023. And the total amount is 2.02 lakh crores. And majorly we are witnessing the tax evasion in the online gaming industry. Let's understand certain aspects with regard to goods and services tax. So it was basically established with the 101st Constitutional Amendment Act. It basically tries to realize the idea of one nation, one tax. Basically intended to promote the economic unification of the Indian economy. It is a destination-based tax, and it basically tends to do away with the cascading effect, the issue which we were witnessing with the other indirect taxes. What is cascading effect? Let's just understand. For example, the producer of wheat is giving this wheat to the miller. Now, miller would be sending this wheat to the wholesaler. Wholesaler would be further supplying this wheat to retailer. Now, at every stages, we used to implement tax. Okay, 10% here also, 10% here also. Okay, and 10% here also. So this used to ultimately increase the amount of tax obligation which was ultimately borne by the customers. Because when it comes to indirect tax, the liability can be shifted. But when it comes to GST, how it does away with the cascading effect? Let's suppose the wheat was produced for rupees 100. We have imposed 10% tax. Now, the price would be increasing to 110. Now, further when we will be going further, when the miller would be supplying the wheat to the wholesaler, whatever tax the miller would have paid, that would be provided to him with the way of input credit. Okay, so ultimately only 10% of the tax the customer has to pay. So the price would be only 110. So it basically enabled us to reduce the inflation level also when it comes to the Indian society. Currently we are having these many tax slabs when it comes to the GST. And we also have GST Council, which is created under Article 279A, wherein the center and the states, they together take the decision which pertains to GST. Now, going further with the article, the Central Board of Indirect Taxes and Customs Chairman has highlighted the sectoral analysis of tax evasion trends. We are also witnessing tax evasion when it comes to the e-commerce, digital services, online gaming, banking and insurance, pharmaceuticals, etc. And when it comes to the goods sector, we are witnessing the tax evasion wherein with respect to iron, copper, scrap and alloys business. Last thing that you need to understand is, what do we mean by tax evasion and what do I mean by tax avoidance? Understand this carefully because these two are two different terms. Tax evasion is wherein you illegally reduce your tax obligation. How do you do that? You come up with false documents, and with that document you showcase that your expenses are more than your earnings. You show that you have basically earned very less profit. So this is an illegal mean to reduce your tax obligation, whereas tax avoidance is a legal mean to reduce your tax obligation. You get tax rebates when you basically invest in schemes like National Pension Scheme, the Provident Fund, okay? So you get tax rebates. So this is a legal way to reduce your tax obligation. With this, we have come to the end of the discussion. Don't forget to practice the quiz which is available at the end of the PPT, and do look into the handout which is available in the description below for your reference. Thank you for being a very patient listener. All the very best for your preparation.